Hey everybody, welcome back to Old World Legends, where we focus on growing the community. I'm your host Mike, and with me as always is Evan.
Hey everyone, we got some updates today. We've got a lot of FAQ questions that I've been building up for a while and bugging Mike to answer. You've heard a few times. You've heard a few times I bring up these little tidbits and these little nitpicks, and Mike's like, "That's a different video." Well, this is the video. Now we're in the video where I get to have my little edge cases talked about.
Yeah, we're in the thick of it now. So we're going to walk everybody through our Old World Legends FAQ. This is something that, again, is community driven, but we're always updating all the time, and in particular with our next upcoming two-day event, or two-day GT at Palm Springs Open. We wanted to make sure we updated this to reflect all of the changes, or at least the ones our community has been discussing for the FAQ update from GW from the 1.5.1. Also to get some additional clarifications and Cathay in there as well. So as always with our version of our FAQ, we're not necessarily going for raw. We're not in terms of this is exactly how it reads and by the letter of the law that's how it's played. We're always interpreting it by RAI, rules as intended. This is what we believe is what GW's intended and what we believe is healthy for the community and will make a really fun experience for both players at the event, because at the end of the day, that's what it's about. It's about making sure you're having an awesome weekend, rolling dice with some great friends. So Evan, why don't we dive in? We've done our best. I'm sure everyone out there, you're going to find some mistakes and some flaws. It's a lot that we had to update, and we're just going to go over the new things that we flagged in here. We're not going to go over anything that necessarily older FAQs, but again, this is public on our Discord, on our channel, on our website. It's available to everybody in case you'd like to read it. Different communities certainly play in different ways, and we would encourage you to, with your local community, to see how they're playing and how they're interpreting the roles, or maybe you want to bring some of these questions up to them, and maybe they have similar answers or different answers, or this might inspire some really great conversation.
Yeah, and just so you know, we'll put the link to this in the video description. That's my job. So if I forgot, you can bug me. But if there's any other edge cases or scenarios that you can think of that maybe were either addressed by the FAQ that we missed, or maybe that the FAQ brought up and created the problem, and now we need to address it, then please comment in the comment description. So to start with, here's a fun one. So we had the match play guide come out, and it has not rule of 3, but the combined arms rules, where if you're using the combined arms rules, you have rule of 3 for characters, 4 for core, 3 for special, 2 for rare. However, how do you deal with the case where you've got units that are in multiple categories, and how do you deal with the cases when you have like a mount that can be used by a character, but then is also its own unit as well? I'm confused.
Yep, so let's dive into that. So again, this is based upon your community and how you want to play. This is how we will be playing at our events, at least certainly coming up in the near future. But again, this is a living document, and as GW gives us more insight and updates, we're always revising it, and also with our yearly and post-event community feedbacks, it's always community-driven. So first and foremost, as Evan pointed out, we are where we can or where we feel it's great, and in many ways we have adapting to the GW match play guide. In many ways, we think the community is very excited by it, and they definitely want to try a lot of it out, and we need to get a bunch of games with it under our belt so we can really understand the impact of what this means. So first and foremost, we are not using the older rule of 3, community driven rule of 3 before. We are now adapting to the GW match play packet. But as Evan said, there's a couple caveats we need to clarify for people showing up to our events.
Yeah, so the first one, right? So how does combined arms work for units that can be taken as special rare, but are also like let's say 0 to 1 as core? So a good example is Graveguard or Stitches of Avalorn, or what often might be coming up is like the Cathan Balloon or the Sky Lantern. Okay, so what we decided is the simplest thing to do is basically use if it's taken in a higher up slot than its normal position, like rare unit taken in special. You can have one additional selection than normally allowed. So if you had the 0 to 2 in rare and you had the 1 in special, well, I don't think you're supposed to be stuck taking only 2 when one of them's rare and one of them's special. That doesn't feel like it gave you anything at all, right? So then I think it's 3 in total, for example, for the Sky Lantern, or 4 in total for the example of something like Graveguard, or another good example is like Deepwood Scouts. So something can be taken in core. That one's even multiple in core and then some in special, so it's still 0 to 4 in total. And again, this is different than what people were doing before, and I think this is a good way to use the match play guide while just dealing with some of these edge cases.
Yep, and again, that's the big thing, is there's clearly was intended to be a composition benefit to those. And again, it's about half the armies, not all of them, but many of the armies say if you take this character you may now, take one of those special or rare things at a higher level slot and such. And so we do feel that that should still be applicable, but it also finding the right balance of that. So exactly right. So if you could take something that was in rare to normally with combined arms in a 2,000-point game, again, that scales if you're playing more than a 2,000-point game, but we're really focused on 2,000-point games, right? You get that one additional, you could take it in special. Conversely, if you had units that are special, such as Graveguard, right? You're normally restricted to 3 because you could take 3 in special with combined arms in a 2,000-point. If you took 1 as core, you now get 1 additional one, so you could take 4 in that case. So that is how we are playing it, and that's our interpretation. We believe this is what was intended and would be healthy for the community. But there's one more, a little trickier one too.
Yeah, so what happens when a character can take a mount that is also a separate unit? Do they have separate pools of 0 to 3? And what if there's multiple kinds of character, like the Magistrate, right, and the Cathay General, and they can both take mounts? Do they have separate pools, or they're all 3 pools? So can you have 3 lanterns, 6 lanterns, or 9 lanterns? That's the question.
Yep. So that's the big, again, different communities are going to interpret it different ways. This is what we believe is a healthy, fun way to be playing the game, at least the way we certainly would like to promote it within our community and the feedback we've been getting from our players. So effectively, it's saying that if you have a character that is on a mount, such as, not a horse or anything like that, but like a big monster or a big war machine, right, such as dragons or the Cathay Sky Lantern, that still counts towards the unit entry for whatever the restrictions were for that for normal. So as an example, you're normally restricted to 2 Sky Lanterns because they're rare in a 2,000-point game for Cathay, right? Cool. All right, that's normally what you're restricted to. If you wanted to put it, because one of your characters, though, can also ride a Sky Lantern, which is super cool. That is still restricted normally to whatever the slots are you are for the rarity of whatever it is. But they do have the benefit with the character in Cathay that says, hey, if you take this character, you now can take one of those Sky Lanterns in a special slot. So it's actually the rule above allows you to take 3. So in this case, you are restricted in a 2,000-point game to 3 Sky Lanterns. So it doesn't matter whether you could put 1 in special if you want, or you could put 1 in character, or you could put 2 in rare. You just can't go more than 3 with the way that we are treating it. So it counts as that. That would be the same thing as if, again, you were taking characters on large monsters. Vampire counts and Strigoi mounts would be the same thing, right? In terms of you have the normal Strigoi compositions, there's 2 in rare, you're restricted to that. If you take a Strigoi Ghoul King, you could take 1 in special, right? So now that would allow you to take 2 plus 1 because you get 1 in special. You could technically mount Strigoi Ghoul Kings on
Terrorgeists.
On the Terrorgeist, right? But we would still be the same thing here. So however you organize your army, you're still restricted to whatever the rarity, the character will eat up one of those slots. You don't get a bonus 4th Sky Lantern or 4th Terrorgeist. So that is how we are interpreting what we believe is intended for the army composition with the combined arms list.
Okay. So let's scroll down. And again, the purple text here is basically things that are new. Green text is things that have been kind of either updated or clarified.
We do have red. The first time we've had a red that we should talk about.
Right. So they did kind of remove things. And Games Workshop was very unclear about pointing out which things in their FAQ were removed and not there anymore. And one of them was a distinction about what's the difference between losing a wound and suffering a wound. And they said that, if suffering a wound, you don't get any saves against. They deleted this. And that's really interesting to see that they deleted that change, because what does that mean? Does that mean that when we see something a little bit later about regeneration saves, that maybe they are fully intending that when you fail a dangerous terrain test, you can actually take a regen save against that? I mean, the suggestion that deleting this clarification indicates that, yeah, they actually do want that to happen. I mean, I'm a little bit flabbergasted, but okay. Right.
Yep, and different. Again, this is a really hot topic in the community, and honestly, I see really good arguments on both sides. I genuinely do. I really wish that GW had, because they've been pretty good about when they update something in the FAQ, they flag it. Hey, we've updated this, and they color it.
Yeah,
and they let you know.
exactly.
But they didn't do that when they deleted something. Versus like what we did here. Hey, it's there, but cross it out, turn it red, it's removed. So again, we are left, not just our community, but everyone else in the old world community, to how are we going to interpret this? The way that we believe or are interpreting their removal of it is that they specifically said you couldn't do it before. The fact that they removed it, our interpretation is that means that you can do it. So that's what we're flagging that out here. So if you are failing a dangerous terrain test, right, or suffering a wound, you can take that regeneration save, which will have an effect, a ripple effect we're going to get to in just a minute on regeneration as a whole.
All right, so then we have this is kind of the big one, and again, just so people know, neither of us are super like hardline on how this works. It's just that it seems to be that if they wanted the rule to simply be that if you got hit with a multi-wound weapon, you take multiple rolls for your regen save instead of just one, they could have just said that. They could have said, hey, if you ever suffer an attack that has multiple wounds 2, do I take 1 regen save or 2 regen saves? They could have said you regen each wound individually. They could have just said that.
Yep.
But they did not say that at all. They said every time you lose a wound, take a regen save, which is totally different and is very expansive. It means dangerous terrain, unstable, demonic instability, and all things like that of that nature. Things like everyone under a template loses a wound. All of those would now be okay. But you can regen though. Apparently.
Yep. So again, this is one of those really tough ones, and this is part of the challenge for us being TOs and running events, is that we have to make decisions going into these events in terms of this is how we're going to be playing at this event. This one is a really tough call for us, and like I said, there are really good arguments on both sides of the table. That being said, the biggest thing for us is we want to see how it plays out. Like, it just landed, this update.
Yeah.
What the actual effects are, there are a lot of people, and rightly so, saying, hey, we're raising a yellow flag. We're concerned this might be too powerful. And I think that's a totally valid concern. But the reality is we and the community as a whole haven't played a ton of games with this change, right? So while it might actually be very overpowered and this wasn't what they intended, it's also possible that it actually is not as overpowered as people are initial reactions to it. And yes, certainly the other case is that, well, vampire counts and tomb kings are strong armies. That is true, but that doesn't mean that that wasn't their intended version to do this. We also see that there's a lot more combat resolution out there than there was before. So crumbling could be a lot more detrimental to undead forces that do crumble with unstable. So ultimately, we decided for the immediate, we are leaning towards the side of we do believe they made that change and made that deletion above, so that this is applicable to that. This is purely a judgment call. Again, whether it's good or bad for the game, we need to play a bunch of games and get out there and actually guys, see the result on the table.
Remember, they made an FAQ change that said, yeah, fire every single rank of your poison archers at large targets. Do it, man. Just live that life. They decided to let people do that, and then they said, oh, that was a bad idea. And they also printed a very unclear, confusing ruling about low leader obstacles that made everyone just lose their minds and be like, I don't get it. And then they again doubled down on it by making the wording a bit clearer than later. So I think this is more like of the Earth and Rampart situation, where they have made a potentially vague ruling, but if you're playing it the way that I think they're trying to change the game into, then yeah, you just get to have regen saves against like everything all the time, and that could be better for the game when a Necrosphinx might just like lose combat to 20 Noblars and then just crumble to death, or maybe it'll be worse because now everything never crumbles ever. But we're just going to have to try it and find out.
Yep, and that's the best way to learn, is to play a whole bunch of games with the community, collect some data, take our surveys, and then go from there. But if GW in the meantime updates it, great, then we will adopt that. But we are, as much as we can, or it makes sense, we'd like to follow what we believe is the intent of the design team.
Okay.
All right, let's move on.
So there are clarifications about things like when to use Swift Stride, and then they changed the wording slightly, but it's pretty much the same. Same for like that victory points on Fanatics. There's some green ones in here. They did dramatically change, and so you're just clarifying your FAQ to match theirs, that you can't use fly during pursuits and overruns. You can still use it during a fleet. And you cannot... And then people were asking before, hey, can I choose to not use fly on my pursuit so that I can then crash into a unit instead of flying past it? And, well, now you have to do that. It's the only option.
Yeah, and this was, again, we already had that in our FAQ. We just, when GW formalizes it in their FAQ, we just flag it as green to saying, yes, GW said this is how it works.
Right.
So sometimes we get some right before GW, We do not always. So, the green kind of indicates, hey, we got that one right. But things change, right? So it's not going to stay this way forever.
Yeah, so these ones are also green for whether using lances on the charge and unpath follow-ups, chariots being able to charge into low layer obstacles and not doing their pet hits, but being able to just do that charge, and then they can't follow you because it's impassable to them, so they just sit there.
Mm-hmm.
So defending the low layer obstacle, do they count as if they're in base contact? And again, the reason why this one comes up is because people are saying, "Oh, great! The way they changed it is now any low layer obstacle, including Earth and Rampart spell, means I charge you, and all my guys only get to make one supporting attack because they're not in base with you." And that's ridiculous. That's completely pants on head. Let's all just go outside and touch some grass. No. So I think what they're trying to say is that the low layer obstacle will block the stomp attacks, which you use your feet for. Okay, and if there's a wall between your feet and the enemy, how are you going to kick them? I guess. And then you have impact hits where, like, a chariot crashes into a wall, it doesn't hit people on the other side. So those are prevented. However, you do get to make your full number of attacks, and you use the rules in the rulebook that say if you're in base contact with the low layer obstacle, you're in base contact with people on the other side, because that's how that works.
Yep. And to be fair, this is one that's been a real pickle for quite some time. They've actually gone through multiple FAQ updates on this because they thought they've clarified it for the community, and they were like, that's still not clear. And even with the latest update, it's still not. There are still people who are still making cases the other way around. So again, this is the way we've decided to. Our understanding of the rule is that if you are defending a low obstacle, that effectively you are immune to impact hits and stomp attacks, but the opponent on the other side, even if they're technically not in base to base, they're in base to base with the low linear obstacle, they still get their full attack. So if it's a character or a unit that has 2 attacks on the profile, they are not considered supporting attacks. They still get their attacks. That is how we will be playing it in our community.
So here's another kind of spicy one that's been coming up recently is if I am a character on a mount, and with the new challenge rules, challenges are actually pretty disadvantageous for characters now, especially when they're fighting a unit of infantry in particular.
Oh, yeah.
Can I charge in there and use all my impact hits to try to kill that champion before he gets to challenge me? And I think the answer from what Games Workshop changed this game to be is yes, they wanted you to be able to do that. And I think they wanted you to be able to do that because the mounts that have impact hits are generally not as good or not as often taken as the other ones. These are usually things like a chariot, for example, that are often, kind of, even if they are large, they're often very easy to pick out, or they're only toughness 5, stuff like that, as opposed to the dragons or the mounted flying characters like the Black Orc on a Wyvern. So you might potentially be out there thinking, oh, well then I really want to take my Black Orc on a chariot now instead of on a Wyvern. That would potentially be a better bet because you can charge in there, use your impact hits to target out that guy, and then get to just chop them up with your whole attacks, especially because of the next ruling about when you lose your attacks from the mountain rider in challenges.
It's almost like they wanted, we believe they wanted impact hits to be more impactful. But yeah, effectively, again, the counter argument that people are making, which is a valid point, is like, well, hey, champions are characters. Well, again, they're not actually characters. They just benefit from a lot of the character rules. That's also another thing GW has never been super clear about. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
I really wish they did clarify that better in the FAQ. So our interpretation is that champion is a champion, is a character is a character. Champion does get some benefits of character, but it does not get unit protection benefits from base to base contact. So if the unit that is charges has impact hits, and if it is in base to base with the champion, it may direct it attacks, which happen now with the updates before combat, before the initiative, before challenges are declared, and they can potentially kill that champion with impact hits, which creates a new spicy reason to take things that have impact hits versus things that have just a bunch of stomps.
Yeah, and if you are worried about the War Boss on Wyvern that you lovingly painted and painted up and you want to play it, well, you can just take the Ed button and just try to use like a strength 6 impact hit from his headbutt to kill that dude too. Try that.
Plus, it's cool.
Yeah.
All right, next one.
So we have the challenges with Mountain Riders. So Games Workshop, and we went over this during our FAQ video, that they say now that when you're in a challenge and you kill the other person in the challenge, their attacks, that the person you killed, are lost, and so are the rider if a mount kills them, or vice versa. But the problem is, does that mean the initiative step or the rest of the attacks regardless of the initiative of that model? And I think people are going to be pretty divided on this because there's a lot of mounts that have attacks that are like strikes first sometimes, or some of them are strikes last, or they have different initiative steps that they would potentially happen at. So it doesn't necessarily feel right to potentially like try to split that up. So the wording of the Games Workshop FAQ is essentially that if the mount kills an enemy in the attack, the mount can continue making all the rest of their attacks, right? but the rider cannot. And just remember that we use fast rolling. So normally, like if you had like 6 attacks with your dragon and he somehow goes before your rider, you would actually make them one at a time in theory, and you wouldn't lose the rest, right? And then vice versa. If the rider kills the enemy first, then the mount doesn't get to make any further attacks after that, including stomps. So generally speaking, if you're some kind of a way for you to get out there and find a mount that has the exact same initiative as your rider, that doesn't mean you're both going to get to swing, which would be a pretty annoying loophole for those people who could do it. And also, it'd be pretty annoying if the Wyvern guy we've been mentioning earlier had his strikes first tail accidentally kill the champion, and then no other attacks from the mount rider or the mount got to do anything, and he only ever got that one wound. That would kind of suck.
Yeah, so this is one that again I think they had clear good intentions on what we believe they were trying to achieve, which is to make characters not an auto overkill versus champion, auto get that 1 wound plus 5 overkill. We believe that clearly they were trying to find ways to reduce it, but there are some loopholes or scenarios where they didn't really think this fully through, and so this is how we're interpreting what we believe is the spirit of what they were trying to achieve with less overkill, but also not as punishing potentially with those loopholes for things that strike at multiple initiative orders.
Yeah, and a really common example of this, for example, could be that if you charged in with a character who is not on a mount even, or whether he is or isn't. Let's say he's just on a horse, right? And this character has a great weapon, which has strikes last, but he also has a ring, like the Ring of Fury from High Elves, that gives him, Hammerhand at his initiative. So his initiative is going to be some number, right? And like that's not one, and he can cast Hammerhand at that number. And if he kills the enemy champion or whoever he's fighting with that spell, he can still make the rest of his regular attacks, but the mount cannot, and vice versa. So it would feel pretty. I think that if you tried to play it just off of which initiative step they die at, there's a ton of edge cases that are silly, and then anyone who can ever build a character who has the same initiative as their mount will feel like they're cheating.
Yep. All right, let's move on.
So I think we've had this several times. You cannot fly during an overrun or pursuit move. Okay, cool.
That's nothing new there. Yep.
Yeah, nothing new
Just
on the
the
inspiring presence. Eventually, we're gonna get down. And we're gonna have clarifications on Cathay, because Cathay actually has a whole bunch of things in here. But
We do.
what we have with Ramparts is kind of what we already talked about. It works the exact same way as if there's a physical LLO, which means that you are immune to stomps and effect hits, but they still get to have their full number of attacks. And we believe that this is. And again, we're saying this not because we want this to be the case or because we want the game to be different. We're saying this because this is how we believe that the FAQ is supposed to be read. And at some point, we have to read the words that other people say and actually interpret it. It's not always going to be airtight, legal jargon.
It's not. And the reality is we run events every single month. We run tons of events all the time. One of the most active communities out there. And we have a broad spectrum of players showing up from different local stores, different local gaming groups, right? From all over SoCal. And we even have some people coming out of state actually for some of our events now. And they have different communities rules. So we have to make decisions, and we have to make them in advance so people know what they're showing up for.
Right, and then this is just a clarification on the ruling that is in the new FAQ, that if you have a character who is a different unit type, for example, a cavalry model who has joined an infantry unit, can they just be targeted like by cannonballs or magic missiles as if they were just sitting there next to the unit? And the answer is yes. So what the bummer about that is that basically the characters who are on horses, or for example my demogryph guy sitting in the unit, is actually probably more of a liability now than he was before. And I don't know if I actually am going to keep doing that, because if the enemy has any Viletide, any Cannonball, anything like that, then my BSB on Demigryph is probably just like, oh crap, well, I'm going to go hang out at the back of the table instead of, joining that unit, right? Now, this is what they changed the rules to be to punish the Tomb Kings players. Instead of just saying, hey, maybe chariots shouldn't join infantry, they said this instead, and that's fine. But that's what we're going to play with.
It will have a ripple effect, and I wouldn't be surprised if in the future they might change their mind on this, but that is what they ruled for now.
Yeah. So we have I think, I don't know why this is purple, but basically, yeah, if you do have skirmishers firing weapons, and you have other skirmish models in the way, do they get cover? And we are just playing it as no, because that would make the games take forever as you're trying to constantly move your skirmishers in such a way to not be in each other's way, which is just like, I kind of want to get on with my life at some point.
Yeah, that's an older ruling. I think we just missed uncoloring it.
I will fix that.
Ta-da! All right, let's move on.
So I think there is a clarification of what it is when a skirmisher unit forms up in combat. But what happens when a skirmisher unit leaves combat? How much can they move? And that's what's coming up next here. We have when the skirmisher unit stops being in combat, how far can they reform? The Games Workshop FAQ says by the smallest amount possible, which if you have like think about it for 30 seconds, you go, oh, so 0.00001 inch. Great. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, so they were again. We're looking at what they were trying to accomplish here, but again, we think there are likely were cleaner ways that they perhaps could have implemented this. So the way we're going to play this out is that again, we skirmisher units done with combat, right? It's no longer combat. They do need to go back in skirmish formation. But what we don't want is, and I think what they were trying to prevent is not let the skirmisher unit space way back out and gain all this additional distance. So again, for wherever the original model is, not on a per unit basis, but on a per model basis, we believe moving up to half an inch is appropriate to still represent a skirmish formation. And without, at most, this would gain you an inch in terms of your unit footprint from one side to the other, which seems very appropriate to what we believe they were trying to do.
Okay. And then the next one, the FAQ clarifies that you have to be able to see a target with more than half of a skirmishing unit's models to be able to charge it. And the reason for this was that people were taking units of, for example, of Pegasus Knights, in particular skirmishing flying units like that, or Harpies or Furies, and having a single model peer around a corner, while the rest of them are all behind a building or behind a hill or whatever the hell they're behind, and they're getting cover or not being able to be charged very easily. And then that one guy says, "Hey, they're over there," and they all just fly over the intervening terrain and then land on top of you. And it's just kind of like, really, really, can they do that? And so they
That's
obviously
feel bad.
yeah,
Sure.
they wanted you to not do that. However, their ruling now states that now when over half have to see, well, what happens when your unit just has more than like 3 or 4 dudes in it, like every kind of skirmishing
Mm-hmm.
infantry unit in the game or something like that? Are you just never going to charge ever because all of your models are blocking each other's line of sight? It's the same thing as the skirmishing shooting unit, but now it's kind of worse. And if you wanted to play it that way, I understand, especially if you think that this is a deliberate change to rebalance the Bretonian army lists. Fair enough. However, if you play it that way, the game will just take forever because it's not going to change what actually happens. It's just going to change how long it takes the other person to reposition all their models in exactly the right spot to do what they want to do. So, oh, sorry. That's why our ruling is that the skirmishing units can see through their own models for the purposes of this, because otherwise, this would just be an absolute nightmare. And so you can't see through the terrain, and you can't jump, charge around corners, but you can just say, okay, I guess I'm just going to draw a line of sight through my models, because otherwise this would be kind of chaotic.
Yep. So we're still retaining the GW FAQ ruling where they're like, hey, that one guy sticking out from behind the cover and have a big unit behind the terrain that can't see, can't charge. We're still doing that because that's what GW ruled.
Yeah.
But we're making sure that skirmishing units just out in the open, if you have like 10-man skirmishing units, suddenly can't charge any direction because 6 of the models can't see what they want to charge, or perhaps they're all in a big line and now they just can't charge left and right. We do not believe that was intended. That I think is an oversight or a mistake on their part. So that's how we're saying no. Actually, the easiest way to solve this is when declaring charges, skirmishing models can see through its own units, its own models, but they can't see through terrain. So this is what we believe was their
Right.
intended result.
And even if you wanted to play it the other way, all they have to do is just move around in an X formation like this, and then all of them can see all of the directions. However, the constant different edge cases that'll come up where, oh, if only I run my little unit of rat darts like right in front of you, and then 3 of your guys can't see my unit, but the other 3 can't see the rats, so now
It's
no one can
just going
charge
to
anybody.
create
It's kind of
frustration. It's just going to.
Yeah.
So we believe this is just the faster, simpler way to let's play the game. Let's move on.
Yeah, let's just play the actual game. Okay. We have clarification. They clarified for like the 4th time that yes, scouts do count for deploying first, which is I don't get that at all. Okay,
Yeah,
man,
I think
you
everyone
do
in the
you.
community doesn't like this, but this is the ruling that they've made. They've made it very clear that's their rulings, which is why it's highlighted green. And the only difference with stupidity is it's been slightly updated. Stupidity, yep, you can't move at all. So before, right, they were tiptoeing around, can you charge with stupidity? Can you not charge? We've always said no, you can't charge with it. But now they made it very clear. Oh, actually, you can't move at all. So failing stupidity is really bad now.
Yeah, and that's a lot clearer and simpler than when it was you get to move up to your
Yep,
movement range, or you can move 0, or you can do whatever the hell you want. You can cast spells.
much
That was
clearer now.
ridiculous. I will say, Mike, that we do need to clarify because a lot of people out there think that stupidity, with the new way that they phrased it, means you can't use inspiring presence, and that is just wrong. So you might want to
Oh, we'll
clarify
have
that
to
as
add that. Yep,
yeah.
that is not intended.
Okay,
Let's just
so
change the thing like that.
poison
Yep,
attacks, and then we're
poison.
going to get on to the armies. I think the main one though is Cathay, has around six or
Cathay.
seven ones in there. So poison attack rolls. Now I saw some people think that the way that they worded poison means that you roll a bunch of dice, and if you get 10 hits and 3 of them are sixes, you then roll all of the dice together, and any of the dice can be applied the +2 afterwards, which is ridiculous.
Hmm.
That's not
Yep,
true.
which is clearly not what intended. It's not how the rules work.
It's exactly like army bane. You roll
So
them separately.
yep, you roll them separately. It's very clear. We're just clarifying that because this is a question that has come up multiple times, which is why we're adding it to the FAQ.
Yes. So I brought up this Orion unit protection thing, where Orion is an infantry character, which means normally you could use like the lone infantry rules to try to hide behind nearby units and not get singled out by cannonballs or spells. But he's forced to join a unit of war beasts, his two little doggy friends, who are technically a different unit type, which now means with the new character rules, he's just free and clear to be shot at any and all times by anything. You can just say, "Hey, I'm just going to vile tide you," and I guess you just die then, because that's how that works. Um, that doesn't seem like maybe something that works for this guy, and he's already like 440 something points. So
Yeah, it feels like this is an oversight from
oversight.
from what the ripple effect of the FAQ update. So we still want to embrace the FAQ update, what they intended with that, but we need to address with Orion in particular that he should still get some protection from the hounds that he's with, because that is what we believe was always intended with that unit.
Yeah, so we're just saying that you're just going to distribute hits amongst him as in the same way that as if he was joined a unit of less than 5 of the same type, because otherwise this would just be a even more unplayable character who we probably still aren't going to see very often. I would love to see
That's
more Wood
basically
Elf
the
people
rule
out
as it
there.
was before.
Yeah,
That's not a new rule. That's not a special rule. This
it's
is
exactly
exactly
like
how it
how it
worked
was
before.
before for him specifically, because he has no choice.
Yep. So that's how we're reviewing him. All
Yeah.
right, on to some new stuff, spicy stuff.
So Cathay has created a bit of a splash with their special roles, and we've been hearing a lot
Right.
of feedback that they're good, but they're not the most broken army as people might have imagined, and things like the Shugengen and Miao Ying are not as strong as you might have imagined because they can't be an incredibly good combat character and be a wizard at the same time. They kind of have to only do one at a time. Okay,
Yep.
fair enough. However, there's still some kind of stacking and unclear abilities that seem to just make your eyes pop out of their head. And if the other player in your group is being nice, they definitely wouldn't play it a certain way. And if they're trying to win at all costs, then they are going to definitely try to take advantage of every bonus they can get. And I wanted to just bring all these things up and talk about them now. Hopefully, I mean, I was really hopeful that we would get a Cathay FAQ coming out soon, but
Well, I'm sure
so
we
far,
will. We just don't know
yeah,
when.
yeah. So far we haven't. So we're gonna just address some of these questions for right now and see. Maybe obviously people are gonna send those in to Games Workshop over the next couple of weeks, and we'll get some later. So the first one is Thunderous Impact. So the Cathayan Grand Cannon has the Thunderous Impact ability where whatever the spot where it strikes the ground, units within 2d6 lose 1 inch on their movement and can't use Swift Stride the next turn. What happens when I just fire a bunch of cannons at the same unit? Do all of the -1 movement penalties start stacking until the guy can't move at all? And we are arguing that absolutely not. That's ridiculous. They didn't even think that you would do that, even though they gave that cannon the ability to fire twice. They don't think
Mm-hmm.
you're going to do that. So no, and again, there's nothing in the game that allows you to drop people's movement multiple times in a row until they can't move. Okay, so no. I think this should be a nothing burger, but I guess we'll see whether people find that controversial. The next
We'll
one
find
is
out.
the Sky Lantern ambush rolls. So the Sky Lantern allows you to have a +1 or -1 to the ambush roll for any unit in ambush. But what happens when, in the very likely scenario where you have multiple Sky Lanterns in your army, can you stack all the plus and minuses together for basically unlimited ambush? And the answer is no. I don't think that was intended either. That would be ridiculous as well.
Yep.
Hopefully, no one
Pretty
disagrees with
straightforward.
that. Okay, so here's the third one. The Learned Feng Shi Bo item is an extremely common item, so Wizard can take it more than once. It gives you an additional spell in the exact same way as a spell familiar from Vampire Counts and War's Chaos. However, this one does not have the limit of 0 to 1 per wizard. Does that mean that you could just buy multiple per wizard and then they can just know all 6 spells, for example? We're under the impression that yes, that is actually something that they might have intended you to be able to do, because this book was written long after they probably have already FAQ'd the previous ones. So if they wanted to change it, they could have already. Right?
Mhm. So again, keep in mind that you can know more spells, but you're still restricted to how many spells you can cast relative to your wizard level with the 1.5.1 update. So you know more spells, you can still only cast what you can cast.
Yeah, and there is a Warriors of Chaos item that does a very similar thing where you know all
Mhm.
7 spells, including the Skirmisher
Yep.
spell, and you can only cast 4.
Yep.
And I don't remember how much that item costs, but it's something like 40 or 50 points. So
But
it's
there's also
not,
another character that knows like this is not
yeah,
unique to Cathay.
it's not incredibly unique. And that item isn't even taken right now very often.
Nope.
So we have the Ogre Loader for shooting. How
3 for
does
just him.
Yeah, there's 3 for the Ogre Loader because he's very confusing. He's a character who's not a character. He's in a unit, but he's not in a unit. How does this work?
And
Right?
yeah, to be fair, he was not the only thing. Like technically, this could happen with orc bullies, with
Yes.
goblin stone throwers, but like no one ever worried about it. But with the ogre loader just is getting a lot more attention. It's like, all right, we should better address this now. So let's dive into it.
So the first one, how does the Ogre Loader work for shooting? He's a character, thus will. So basically, when we're saying shooting, it's when you're shooting at the cannon. We might want to clarify that.
Hmm.
So when you're shooting at the cannon, how does it work? So you're a character and has joined a unit that is less than 5 models. So the shots are distributed against the war machine and the loader equally until either one is dead. In the same way that if you were firing, a bunch of bullets into a character on foot who is joined to like 3 models, then they would distribute.
This is a
equally.
core rule. This is not
Yeah.
specific to Cathay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So so in other words, you're going to start dropping them individually. If you have something like a cannonball, that actually does hit models separately based on who it hits, and can even potentially hit both of them in one shot. And then you can do wounds to them separately and roll the wounds separately. Same thing with like a draw line attack. But if you have with a fireball and you had 2d6 hits and you got hit 7 times, then you put 4 of them on the cannon and 3 of them on the ogre, and then you roll a wound.
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
Next one is it's scoring. So if you've killed the cannon, but the ogre is still alive, or if you killed the ogre and the cannon is still alive, how does all that work? It's exactly the same as if you have the fanatics or the Skaven weapon teams, where killing the ogre is not worth any points, but if you kill the war machine, you get the full points for both, even if the ogre is still alive, because that's how all the other kind of detached, separate things have worked in the past. And then finally,
Yep. So we're just basing it off of how they ruled that on the other
yes, exactly.
unit upgrade things. So we're just saying, yep, whatever we saw them apply over there, we're going to apply the same rules here.
Okay. Then the last one is, can the ogre issue a challenge? And yes, he is a type of character. He has the character special rule. So obviously, yes, he can do that. And I think that is the main ones for Cathay. I have a vague memory that maybe people can buy the other item that gives you -1 to hit multiple times, but obviously that shouldn't stack either. That's ridiculous.
But again, people please do join our Discord, right? And we have a rules thread specifically for the FAQ. So
Yeah.
if you have more questions or more things you'd like to see us add to future updates of the FAQ or the next time we do the video, please do join in the community in the conversation. We'd love to dive into them.
Okay. And this Black Orc Chariot one was one of the ones that was updated by Games Workshop, so that one should be green as well. We've got the Skin Wolf characters. The warp form thing doesn't work when you join the unit anymore. That was one of the ones that actually made me facepalm visibly in front of my opponent. I would be like, really, dude? Really? Are you absolutely serious? Definitely not calling out Tom Carley specifically about that.
All right, let's move on.
That's it. That's everything.
All right, we got to the end. All right, we did it. So again, those are our first pass. We know there's going to be more FAQs that need to happen for the latest update. Again, we're not trying to cover every single possible question that ever exists. It's the questions that are coming up frequently that we are trying to address for our community and make a ruling for that we know are likely to come up at future events. I'm sure a lot of you out there probably agree with all of these things and don't necessarily agree with all of them, and that's totally cool. Different people, different communities are going to play the game different ways. There are certainly a lot of communities out there who do want to play it raw. That's the way they like to play, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's totally great, but we play rules as intended, as we say at the top of our heading there, and we believe we're trying to, for people showing up to our events, we want to make sure everybody showing up, winning or losing, is having a great time and are going to have a blast playing the game with their opponent. Evan, any last closing words, sir?
I just really hope that these new FAQ rulings help people stay legendary. See, I worked it in there. I snuck it up.
All right. We'll see you all next time. Bye.